Alright you guys, so as you can see by the thumbnail, this is episode 63 of Inner Demons. So check it out you guys. I know it's been a minute since I ran the last episode, but I'm going to just jump straight back into this. If I remember right, where I left off in the last episode, episode 62, was basically I had just got raided. Campbell PD, SWAT, they just raided my house on Beecher Court. And I was to the point where they were just getting ready to transport me to Campbell PD. So that's where I'm going to pick up at. So before I get into this episode, the one thing that I want to say to you guys and make clear is that I remember everything that happened on that day like it was yesterday. So the thing that I want to say to you guys though and make clear is that I remember everything that happened on that day like it was yesterday. And it's crazy when I think about it because it's already been almost 21 years since this happened. But that day definitely changed my life in a number of different ways. It put me on a different track, in a different direction. I just didn't see it yet. So anyways, like I told you guys in episode 62, it was basically SWAT and B&E that breached the search. They're the ones that kicked my door in and raided my house that day. And you know, when they came in, they found narcotics, they found weapons, they found other things that I knew was just going to create a lot of problems for me in the long run. But, you know, I was a 3-striker. I didn't have nothing to lose. And, you know, I pretty much knew that the game was over at that point. So anyways, I don't remember if I mentioned this in episode 62, but aside from the narcotics and the weapons that they found at my house that morning, they also found a disc that was in the hard drive of my computer. And basically what it was 1,956 pages of court-sealed documents that pertain to Operation Black Widow. That whole investigation. And even though the majority of the information on that disc pertained to Operation Black Widow, there was FBI, I think they're called 402s, debriefs, there was memorandums from Pelican Bay, Corcoran, there was all kinds of stuff in there about IGI, who debriefed, there was active witness lists, people that were cooperating on the streets. There was a wealth of information on that disc. And when it was given to me, it was given to me by one of the generals at that time, their wives, and I was told to look at that disc and to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. That there was information on that disc that would benefit all of us that were out there on the streets. And the only ones that they wanted to put eyes on that disc was me, Sykes from Goshen, and there was one other individual. I can't remember who the third one was, but they basically wanted us to go through that disc and to study it. There was just a lot of information on there that would have put us ahead of the game, and it would have helped those of us that were still out there on the streets that were being investigated. My name was in there throughout a lot of that disc. There were several debriefs where people had dropped my name. There was other people that had given up information about me on the streets, what I was doing, what I was involved in. Sykes was mentioned in there about some of the things that he was involved in. So I wanted as much information about the streets and everything that was going on as possible. And even though my main focus was to just look at the things that pertain specifically to me, I still wanted to know as much about everything that was going on as I possibly could. I was a 3-striker. I was out there involved in criminal activity. I knew that the feds were on me at that time. I knew that the local law enforcement had an investigation on me. I was involved in some other things, and I didn't know whether or not I had other cases that might have been pending. And I had also just gotten into that shootout. So I wanted to know as much about the streets and everything that was going on out there as I possibly could. Sykes felt the same way. And I had basically opened up my doors and told Sykes, you know, anytime you want to come by here, like after 10 in the morning and spend a couple hours going through it, you're welcome to come over. Because it was time consuming, going through all that information. There was a lot of information on there, a lot of sensitive information. So aside from all the other contraband that they found in my house that day, they also found that disc. And I knew that that was going to open up another whole can of worms in itself. What you guys got to understand is that criminal organizations like the NF, the Mexican Mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the BGF, any kind of criminal organization, they're always trying to find resources that will benefit the organization, outside resources such as, you know, putting family members, wives, close associates in positions that will benefit the organization. Dispatch law enforcement, the county jails, working in corrections, the military, DMV, banks, and those kind of jobs where they can pull credit reports and get people's addresses. Because we're always looking for people, confidential informants, people that are working against us out there on the streets. These kind of jobs or these kind of resources help locate these types of individuals. And that's basically how we came into possession of that CD, by having someone that worked inside of the courthouse, the federal courthouse. We had them in pocket, and they were working together with one of the defense attorneys, and that's how it was smuggled out. So I'll get more into the details of that CD later when it would come up later on down the line, but trust me, when they found it, they were tripping. They wanted to know how we came into possession of something like that. And as soon as they got it and they seen what was on it, they contacted the feds, and the feds told them, look, this is court-sealed information. The feds, when they looked at the disc, they tripped out. They were worried about it. They were like, you know what? They must have some kind of plug or resource working in the federal courthouse. We got to find out who it is, because this is big right here. So they were definitely worried about it. So in the last episode, I talked a little bit about how, I was trying to take the case and get it off of Vicky so that they could let her go right there. And, I told you guys how Livingston showed up, how the district attorney showed up. I didn't know it was the district attorney until later on, until I would see him in court. And then I told you guys at one point, after about 45 minutes of sitting there watching these guys ransack, my house, they told me it was time to get transported. So, I got up, and they had walked Vicky to the back bedroom to get her dressed. And, there were so many cops walking around, and it was an uncomfortable atmosphere. It was uncomfortable being in that situation. I felt bad that Vicky was in cuffs. So there was a point where we were crossing paths when they were walking me out the front door that I had an opportunity to give her a kiss. And to this day, I regret not doing it, because that would literally be the last opportunity that I would have, and I didn't take advantage of it. I just basically told her that I was going to do everything I could to make sure that she was okay, and she started to break down. So I walked off. I didn't want to see it again. There was a lot of stuff that was on my mind at that point. I had to get myself mentally prepared to go back in to that world. I had been out at that point for, I believe it was around 6 or 8 months, and that was the longest I had ever stayed out back then. I was never able to stay out any longer than a month here, a month there. Sometimes it was just a couple of weeks, and this time I had stayed out for 8 months. So I had gotten used to being back out in the free world, and now I was having to mentally prepare myself to go back inside. That was a transition, just like you go through a transition of coming back out and, adjusting and acclimating to this free world. You gotta, go through a transition to go back inside as well. And that's what I was doing. I was mentally preparing myself to go back inside. And it was a dreadful feeling. This was something that I thought I would never experience again. But I had to keep it real. I knew I was still involved in criminal activity. I was still out there functioning in an NF Street regiment. We were involved in all kinds of criminal activity. So, I knew it was coming sooner or later, especially when everything started happening out there. The walls started closing in on me. I knew it was just a matter of time. And that day, sure enough, matter of fact, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last episode, but that week that I got raided, I had even made a little footnote. I had wrote a little footnote. I forget where I had put it, but it was even in my discovery that I put, move everything to the Cadillac's trunk and park it down the street. I was going to take all the contraband that I had in the house and put it inside of one of my car's trunks and park it down the street, because I knew that something was going to happen. I just felt it. I told you guys that I had a lot of plans for that house that I was staying in at that time. There was things that I wanted to do to the backyard, and there was just things that I wanted to do around that house. But for whatever reason, I couldn't picture it happening because it wasn't going to happen. Anyway, so I remember getting in the back of that squad car, the highway patrol car, and I remember that's when it really sunk in that, damn, I was really going back. this was something that I never wanted to experience ever again. I got used to being out. I got used to doing things when I wanted to do them, going places that I wanted to go when I wanted to go, just having all my freedoms back. And now all that was being taken away. And that was the hardest part about the transition. That was the hardest thing for me to adjust to. All that, I was losing everything. You know, I had a little dog. I had to, you know, basically my little relationship with him was gone. And then there was my personal relationship with Vicky. You know, the fact that I was supposed to see my family that week. They were gonna drive up to San Jose, and you know, I had some stuff I was gonna give them. None of that stuff happened. It was literally they pumped my brakes at a bad time, a week too early. If they'd done it a week later, I would have felt a little bit better. But they canceled out all my plans. Anyways, so I'm in the back of the squad car, and I start thinking just about, you know, being back in Pelican Bay and having to go back through San Quentin, having to go through that whole process, getting another number, because I had just discharged the first time in my adult life at the age of 34. From 18 to 34, I had always been on parole, in and out of prison. And I had finally discharged. I gave my number back. I was free, but now I was going back and I was gonna have to get a new number. This was gonna be my third number. And it's just a messed up feeling. There's only one other situation that I can think of that's even worse than that, or that comes even close to it. And that's when, you know, every time I've been on a bus from San Quentin driving to either Pelican Bay or Corcoran, it's just a dreadful feeling. You get this sick feeling inside the pit of your stomach. Corcoran is a prison that I've always just hated. I hate doing time in Corcoran. I hate the shoot program there. It's just the way that it's set up. It takes an hour for them to run yards. Just your cellies on the other side of the cell if you got one. Just the whole setup, the way it's set up, the way that the pods are set up, just that prison, the way that staff act over there. There was just nothing about Corcoran except for the cookies that they used to give us in our lunches that I liked. Pelican Bay, I had gotten used to doing time in the shoe, so I didn't mind Pelican Bay. But still, it was still a dreadful existence. Pulling up to that prison, seeing that welcoming party out there on the back dock, and just having to go through that whole routine. It's just, it's a bad feeling. You know, you're away from your loved ones and your family, and this was kind of like what I was feeling when I was in the back of that highway patrol car on my way to Campbell. I was just thinking about, like, man, everything's gone. My cars, my truck, you know, my girl, my relationship, just everything's gone. I'm gonna have to give it all up. I'm gonna lose a lot. There's a lot of things I'm gonna lose. I'm not gonna get them back, even if I do make it out of this. But that's the other thing. I knew I was in a situation that I wasn't gonna make it out of. I was in a lot of trouble. SWAT doesn't kick your door in for a misdemeanor. You know, most of the time they come and kick your door in when you got a serious case. And there's no doubt about the fact that I had a serious case. And I was the main target in that investigation. And I knew it. You know, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about just all the things that I was losing. It's just a sick feeling. And those of you that have been there, that have been in the backseat of a squad car, when you caught a case and you knew that you weren't gonna beat this case. It was a case that they had you dead bang, they caught you slipping, and you were gonna do some time. You were gonna go sit down and do some time for a while. And that's where I was at. You know, the other thing that I was thinking about was this monster-sized habit that I knew was gonna put me on my back. You know, and I told you guys how much D I was using at that time. I'm lucky I didn't know D. Money wasn't an issue, so I could buy as much of that stuff as I wanted to buy. So I knew that this was something that I was gonna have to deal with in the county jail. I probably had about another good 10 hours before I was really gonna start getting sick. And you know, I didn't even know how bad it was gonna be until it happened, until I got right in the throes of it. And then, you know, I felt how bad it really was. You know, but the other thing that I was thinking about is that no matter how sick I got, no matter how bad it got, that I was gonna have to hide it. I couldn't tell the nurses, I couldn't let anybody, you know, visibly see me sick or even think that I was sick. Somehow I was gonna have to find the strength to push through it and not let nobody know. Because again, unlike the Mexican mafia, the Nuestra Familia has a policy against any type of habit-forming drugs, using any type of habit-forming drugs. If you get caught, they're not necessarily gonna whack you or take you out the first time, but eventually it can lead to that. But if you're someone that continues to keep indulging, eventually your number's gonna come up. They're gonna realize where your priorities are at. And again, it's the mentality that the NF forbids. When somebody's all twacked out on Garaga, or when they're using, they're not trustworthy. They bring that dopey mentality with them. But you're also out there functioning with people that are involved in some serious criminal activity. And nobody's gonna want you around when your awareness is running at 20%. You're a liability. You can't be trusted. Nobody can depend on you. And then again, if you get busted, that habit becomes to be a bigger liability, because a lot of people can't deal with that type of sickness. They'll do anything to get a fix, and I'm talking about anything. So again, that was just something else that I was thinking about. I knew that I was gonna have to push through this somehow, be strong about it. I was gonna have to put on a fake front that I couldn't let anybody even think that I was coming down off of Garaga. So that was something else that was on my mind. I didn't know how bad it was gonna be, but I knew that it was gonna be pretty bad. And then something else that I was thinking about was who else got busted. I know that it was either Livingston or one of the other cops had mentioned that there was other houses that were involved in this investigation, and that they were also serving search warrants at those houses as well. I didn't know if it was just Pony, if it was somebody else that I was associated with, if it was actual regiment members or associates. But all I could do was hope that it wasn't some of my safe houses and that it wasn't some of the bigger players, so that the regiment could continue to keep generating money. Because I knew that that's all leadership cared about anyway. I'll keep it real with you guys. I knew that they really didn't care about me getting busted. It happens all the time. Oh, B just got busted too, another one, vice does. So, all they're gonna be worried about is who's gonna replace me, and they're gonna forget about me within a minute, if that long. So all I could hope for was that there was still enough of my regiment out there to keep continuing to function and to keep continuing to generate money. I knew that they would find their way through it. They had all the contact information out there. At that point, I just didn't know who had got busted or what was happening. I just knew that I was on my way to Campbell PD. At that point, I didn't know who else might have got raided and who was gonna still be out there. But I couldn't concern myself with that. I had my own shit to worry about at that point. I had a serious case, I was looking at life, and I was on my way to Campbell PD. So boom, I get to Campbell PD and they walked me in there, and Campbell PD is a little small substation, and there was nobody in there. And this highway patrol officer, he walks me in and he puts me in a holding cage. So I want to say it was about 30 minutes after I had gotten there. I was just standing there thinking about a lot of the same things that I was thinking about when I was in the back of that squad car, and they walked Vicky in. And I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't know if they were really gonna let her go or if I was gonna get the banana in the tailpipe. I didn't trust law enforcement, and I had no reason to believe that they were gonna honor their word and let her go if I copped to all these charges. But I had no other choice, and under the circumstances, I was willing to take that chance. So anyways, they walk her in and they take the cuffs off her and they put her in another holding tank that was right directly across from me. So I had a visual. She was right there on the other side of a big plate glass window. And I understand she was real emotional. She was broken up. Her life had basically been upended. Both of our lives had been upended. I was a little bit stronger because I had been through this before and I was used to that lifestyle. But this is something that she had never experienced before, so she was having a hard time dealing with it. And I think the biggest thing for her was knowing that I wasn't going to come back. Our lives out there in San Jose and the future that we were building together, that was done. You could say it was even a memory at that point. So my whole purpose was to try to give her some moral support, to try to let her know that everything's gonna be okay. So Vicky was aware of the fact that I was keeping a safe at Roger Carranza's house. Roger Carranza was the tattoo guy, the guy that convinced his family to rent us the house that we were staying in. She knew that I was safe keeping a safe in his garage and that I had $25,000 in that safe. So I start making a box motion to her through the window, and I basically tell her, look, I'm gonna make sure that that safe gets to you. You're gonna be okay. At least you'll have that money to fall back on, and it'll help you get back under your feet. But she didn't care about that. She was like, you know, what about you though? What about us? You said that you would never get back in this situation again, that this wouldn't happen. And I did. You know, a lot of the times it wasn't that I was out there trying to sell her a dream or that I was just trying to, you know, pacify her. I guess in some ways I was, but those weren't really my intentions. I was hoping that it was gonna be okay. I was hoping that I wouldn't get busted. You know, if I had to be honest, because of the things that I was involved in, it was inevitable. But what was I gonna tell her? We'll just keep doing what we're doing while we're on borrowed time. You know, I wasn't gonna tell her that. So when she started asking me what was gonna happen to me, that was a question I didn't know how to answer. I knew I was in a lot of trouble. I was a 3-striker. Like I said, they raided my house. It was a serious case, and I knew that they were gonna try to make an example out of me, especially with the tattoo that I had on the back of my head. Out there in San Jose running around, it's just like, you know what, this guy was out there basically thumbing his nose at us in our face. So, you know, we're gonna make an example out of guys like him. We don't like high-level gang members that are involved in criminal activity out here in Santa Clara County. So we're gonna make sure that we put you on a shelf for a long time. But again, this wasn't something that I was gonna tell her. I just told her, look, I don't know what's gonna happen. It might not be that bad. We just gotta wait to see what happens until I go to court. Once I go to court, I'll get a better idea. But right now, let's not worry about that. Let's just worry about where you're gonna stay and, you know, what you're gonna do to get yourself back together out there, because you're gonna need as much help as you can get. So it probably wasn't even like 5 minutes later, after I had mentioned the safe, that the door opened up and Roger Carranza walked in handcuffed. And I'm not gonna lie, when I seen him, I felt sick. It was the worst case scenario that could have possibly happened in that situation. This was the one thing that I was depending on to help her, and now that wasn't gonna happen. So when Roger came in, I watched them escort him to a holding tank, and I was just somehow hoping that even though they busted him, maybe they didn't bust him at his house, and maybe the safe's still in his garage, it's still there, and there's still a chance to get it before they get it. Even though I knew that that definitely wasn't gonna happen. So as soon as they took the cuffs off him and the officer walked away, the first thing I did was made a box motion like, hey, where's the safe? And as soon as I did that, he understood. He made a cutthroat gesture like, it's gone, bro, they got it. That was bad news right there. So I'm thinking to myself, there goes that thought. And my only other recourse at that point was to try to get the money off the streets that was still out there. There was still a lot of money that was on the streets. People owed me money, $5,000 here, $3,000 there, $2,000 here, but getting it was gonna be a challenge. You know, I've been around long enough to know how the game works, and I've seen it happen to other people. And you know, a lot of the times when we get busted, you know, people that have your guns or your money out there on the streets, they start coming up with excuses about what happened to it or why they can't get it. So I knew that that was a possibility, that was gonna happen, that I was gonna get the runaround, and it was gonna be hard recovering a lot of that money. And it was. You know, I would end up catching cases trying to recover some of that money, which I'll talk about in some of the later episodes. But a lot of these individuals that had money that belonged to me out there on the streets started coming up with sorry excuses about why they couldn't get it, what they had to do with it. I basically got the runaround, and there was only so much I could do. I could start deeming people and putting green lights on them, but I didn't want to do that. But like I said, I'll get into all that later. So the way Campbell PD was set up, I was able to communicate with Roger through the windows. I had a visual on him, but I couldn't hear him, and he didn't know sign language, so it was just basic communication. I could only get so much information from him, so all I was able to really get from him was that they arrested him at his job, and then they transported him back to his house where they got the safe and some other contraband. That's all I was able to get from him. I didn't know it at the time either, but they also had another individual that was up front in another holding cell that I couldn't see. and that was John Santa Ana. This was another associate. He wasn't a regimental member. He was somebody that was assisting me out there on the streets. He was basically holding all my guns. And this old man was a good dude. I had a lot of love and respect for him, but unfortunately, he also got raided that same morning. So for those of you that watched episode 62, if you guys recall, I had a conversation with Agent Livingston, the cop that was basically in charge of all these investigations about the deed that they found in my house and about basically letting Vicky go. And during that conversation, I told him that I would cop to everything that they found at my house if they let her go. And he said that he would honor this. If I was willing to take it on the chin, that he'd honor this. But he also asked me if there was anything else at the house that they didn't find. And at that point, as far as I knew, there was still a half P of Chris in the garage that they didn't find. So I told him, yeah, there's a half P in the garage that your guys missed. So I walked out there, showed them where it was. You know, eventually they were gonna find it anyway. And I didn't want to take the chance of jeopardizing, you know, them not letting her go. So I just gave it up. So when I told Livingston that I was willing to take ownership of all the contraband that they found at my house, if they'd be willing to let Vicky go, Livingston told me that if I was serious and that if I was really willing to do that, that once I got back to Campbell, that I'd have to make an open statement on tape and that I'd have to confess to that in an interview. And I told him I'd do that, but that I wasn't going to talk about nothing else. So he agreed to it. And again, he said that if I was really willing to do that, that he'd honor his word and that he'd let her go. Now, I'll be honest with you guys. I really didn't expect them to let her go. He was a cop. I didn't trust him. There was no reason why I was going to put that kind of trust in him. But at that point, I really didn't have any other alternative. So I want to say it was about 2 or 3 hours after we got to Campbell that they started conducting interviews. And these interviews were being conducted by a Samoan cop that was part of this agency. I believe his name was Agent Philo. And I think John Santa Ana was the first one to go in and get interviewed. Obviously, at the time, I didn't know what John Santa Ana went in there and said, but he was only in there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then he came right out. The next one to go in was Roger Carranza. So Roger goes in, and he ends up staying in there for about 20 or 30 minutes. And here's the thing, it's been 21 years, so I don't even care about none of this stuff no more. But when Roger came out, I watched him walk all the way back to his cell, and as soon as the cop took his handcuffs off and walked away, the first thing that Roger did was came up to the window, looked me dead in my eyes, and made the zipper motion over his mouth like I didn't say nothing. And I'll be honest with you guys, I remember thinking that, you know what, it felt good to know that all the individuals that were working with me out there on the streets were showing some form of loyalty. And I remember thinking at that point that I wanted to try to take as many of these cases off of these cats as I could. I wanted to try to take the cases off of John Santa Ana. I was just gonna tell them that he allowed me to use a portion of his garage to safekeep some of my personal property and that he didn't know what it was that I was keeping in there. And then as far as Roger, apparently they found a half zip of Chris in the trunk of his car. And I was gonna tell them that I had borrowed his car the day before to make a delivery and that half zip belonged to me. But none of that happened. I didn't know it at the time, but Roger had already told on me. He'd already gave up everything at his house. This is something that I'd find out later on during the course of the case. But at that point, I was thinking that he had kept it 100. So I wanted to do everything that I could to clear these cats. Anyways, at some point, the officer that was escorting us to these interviews came to my tank and pulled me out to be interviewed. And I remember going into this interview room with this Samoan cop. And I remember thinking that he reminded me of a lot of the Samoans that I grew up with from San Francisco, from the Army Street Projects, that were all affiliated with the SOS, the Sons of Samoa. And you guys know how the Usos are. Long braided ponytails, big corn-fed individuals, and this guy looked just like one. And although I had a lot of love and respect for a lot of those Usos that I still remember to this day, Cedro, Hollywood Paradise, and a lot of those other Usos that used to sell weed right there on the basketball court, I wasn't in no mood to play any games with this cop Philo. I knew that he was there to conduct this interview and that he basically just wanted to hear me shit all over myself. So I wasn't in the mood for any of the games he was trying to play. And what I mean by that is because this individual, he obviously knew that he had some size on him. And I even told him, look man, you can stop beating your chest. If you want to play the tough guy role, just have somebody else conduct the interview. Because I'll be honest with you, after everything I've been through this morning, I'm not in the mood to play your games. And believe it or not, that ended up clearing the air because he told me, he's like, look man, I'm just here to conduct the interview. Nothing more, nothing less. but his whole demeanor changed and it just felt like he brought it down 3 or 4 notches. So when I walked into this interview room with Philo, he stands up and I knew this was all part of the role that he was playing. So he went through all the motions of basically reading me all my rights, telling me that anything that I said in that interview room could be used against me and that that interview was being recorded, which I was already aware of. Anyways, the interview was basically cut and dry. He asked me some simple questions and I gave him some real basic answers. He started out by asking me if I was aware of the fact that they found some H at 2820 Beecher Court, the house that I was living at, and I told him yes, that it was mine. Then he asked me if I was aware of the fact that they found some methamphetamine at 2820 Beecher Court, the house that I was living at, and I told him yes, that it was also mine. So he ran through a list of contraband that he had, asking me about all the items that they had found in my house that morning, and I answered every question the same way, that I was aware of it and that it was mine. And that was basically the extent of the interview. And then the cop that walked me in there came back in, pulled me out, and then brought me back out to my holding tank. So I want to say it was about 20 minutes after they finished doing the interviews that 4 agents from the Department of Justice came in to start taking us to the main county jail one at a time. And obviously, I was the first to go. But anyways, you guys, this is probably a good place to stop this episode so that I can start the next one when I get to the main county jail. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this one here. Anyways, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Inner Demons. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. And again, something else that's extremely important that I'm going to continue to keep reminding you guys about is to not only hit the like, drop a comment, and share the video, but also hit the all symbol on the notification bell so that you're advised anytime I drop content on this channel. So with that being said, as always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for also continuing to tap into the channel. In the meantime, you guys enjoy the rest of your day and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.